Good evening. We came into this night with all 435 seats in the House and 36 seats in the Senate up for grabs.
And it ends with the Republican sweep taking control of the House and the Senate.
Bob Schieffer, the mood of the country was a major factor tonight.
The mood of the country was nasty, and the country took most of it out on Barack Obama. This was a referendum on Barack Obama. It was really a referendum on both parties. It's going to be interesting to see now how the two parties react. Clearly, the president has to reorganize and make a new effort here. But, you know, Republicans have some responsibility now. They've got to come up with something that goes beyond we're just against everything President Obama's for.
You know, Charlie, we were talking about whether the Republicans would get 6 seats. They got at least 7 seats. We still don't know about the state of Alaska. And then they've enlarged their majority in the House, the biggest since Harry Truman. This turned out more than a wave.
Indeed, it did. As Bob said, it was because the anger against Washington, the anger that nothing was getting done, they blamed the President of the United States. Time after time, the polling indicated that when the Republicans were voting, they were voting because not so much they liked their candidate, but they hated the president and the way Washington was working.
Now, let's take a look at the man who is most likely to be leading the Senate for the Republican Party. He is Mitch McConnell. He won re-election tonight in his home state of Kentucky. There you see him winning handily over Allison Lundergan Grimes. Nancy Cordes, Mitch McConnell, currently the minority leader, most likely to be elected by his caucus, the majority leader. How will government be different in the Senate under McConnell's leadership?
Well, he told me last week that he wants to work with the president, a marked change from the man who said that his main goal in life was to make President Obama a one-term president. Now he says he'd like to find areas of agreement with the president on comprehensive tax reform, on some trade agreements. He knows that Republicans now have just 2 years to show, as you said, Bob, that they can govern, that they're not just an opposition party if they want a Republican to be elected as president in 2016.
One small point, though, we're in many of these races where Republicans won. They were in states that Mitt Romney had won by double digits. So it was fertile territory for the Republicans tonight.
Absolutely. The map was not on the Democrat side. In fact, President Obama said it was the worst map for the Democrats since the Eisenhower era. And that's because so many Democrats were up for re-election this time, especially in Republican seats. In Arkansas, for example, that state went for Mitt Romney by 24 points. So it's no surprise that someone like Mark Pryor, the Democrat, went down there tonight.
I think the president knows the odds against him and he has to do something. But I'm reminded of the 2013 White House Correspondents' Dinner when he said, some folks still don't think I spend enough time with Congress, the president. He said, why don't you get a drink with Mitch McConnell, they asked. Really, the president says, why don't you get a drink with Mitch McConnell?
And let me tell you something. We all laughed. Mitch McConnell didn't laugh. And I'll tell you something else. He hasn't forgotten.
And he hasn't forgotten that joke. Let's talk about areas of compromise. John Dickerson has been at our decision desk. You've been looking through all these numbers. What is the incentive for Republicans to compromise?
Well, the incentive for Republicans to compromise is that in 2016, the number of the Senate seats where Republicans are running, a lot of those are in Democratic states or states that are battleground states. In 2016, it'll be a presidential year. The Democratic coalition that didn't turn out tonight in 2014 is more likely to turn out in 2016, which means there'll be a lot of Republican candidates running in places where it'll be tough for them. And so they want to show, and this is what Republican leaders have said, they need to show that they can govern. They need to show that they can get things done. And that doesn't just mean putting bills on the president's desk. It means showing people that they are open to compromise with the president. And that job begins for Mitch McConnell tomorrow.
Now, the other big theme tonight are the governor's races. There are more than 30 governor's races up for grabs tonight. Let's have a look at one of the closest ones you're ever going to see. That was Florida tonight. CBS News is projecting that Rick Scott is the winner, but look at those vote totals there. Less than 100,000 votes between Rick Scott and Charlie Crist, the former governor and former Republican. We also had an important race in Wisconsin. Governor Scott Walker, the Republican, holding on to his seat there. He is a likely contender for the presidential nomination in the Republican Party in 2016. And then moving over to Kansas, Sam Brownback, it appears, will also win re-election there in Kansas, the Republican holding that seat.
An interesting.
And Pennsylvania, look at there, Tom Wolf. That is a pickup there. Governor Tom Corbett, who is arguably the most vulnerable Republican governor in the country, and the Democrat has won that seat in Pennsylvania. One bright spot for the Democrats there.
Bill Whitaker's been following the governor's races for us tonight. Bill?
Well, Scott, it was a very tight race, but a very big win for Rick Scott in Florida. Democrat Charlie Crist had been hoping that the Hispanic vote would give him the edge tonight. But if you look at our exit polls, Rick Scott held his own with the Hispanic vote, and he won overwhelmingly the white Christian vote. And they comprised 36% of the electorate. But the big story is that the silver lining the Democrats were hoping for tonight, that the governor's races would break their way, that just didn't happen.
You know what's it? Go ahead, sorry.
No, it was in blue state after blue state, in strong blue states like Massachusetts and Maryland. Maryland, where they haven't elected a Republican governor, they've only elected one Republican governor since 1967. The Republicans won tonight. They even won in Illinois, President Obama's home state. The only good bright spots, as you were saying, there was Pennsylvania and, of course, California, where Jerry Brown won big in the big state of California.
You know, Barack Obama didn't campaign, except I think in one of these Senate races. He felt comfortable campaigning for some of these governors, even Michelle Obama, and it didn't help very much.
But let me just put one point in here. You know who a big winner was tonight? Christie.
He campaigned in
Christie.
37 of these races.
Yes, and he raised about $100 million for these Republican governors. Christie won big
He
tonight.
could be the biggest winner.
And let's keep the governor's races in perspective, too. The Republicans won big in 2010. They won big in 2012, and now they've won big in 2014 in the state houses and the governor's mansions around the country.
I'll talk to Chris Christie tomorrow morning on CBS This Morning.
Right, he will join us tomorrow morning. One of the other key races that we were watching tonight was in Kansas, the governor's race there. Nancy, Sam Brownback, one of the most conservative governors in the country, the most massive tax cuts in the country, spending cuts there. He won tonight. Will Republicans say this is a validation of our principles and our ideology?
I'm not sure that they will, because after all, this was in Kansas, deep red Kansas, a state that went for Mitt Romney by 22 points. The fact that he was even in a tight race with a Democrat, not just an independent, but a Democrat, is a sign that there's a real schism in that state about some of these deep cuts. The state saw its bond rating slashed twice over some of these deep spending cuts. It created a divide between Republicans in the state, which left not just Brownback vulnerable, but also the senator from that state, Pat Roberts, who also eked out a victory tonight. But it's still pretty controversial in Kansas, and it'll be interesting to see whether Brownback changes course.
But, you know, again, even the vulnerable Republican candidates seemed to win tonight.
Yeah,
Sam Brownback was one of the most vulnerable incumbent Republicans.
One more
on the
time, this
ticket
was
tonight.
an election that was about not who you're for, but who you're against. Not what you're for, but what you're against.
And it appears the Republicans have picked up at least 7 seats in the Senate. The Democrats picked up 0 from Republicans. They saved a seat in New Hampshire, but they didn't pick up any from Republicans.
I want to get a sense from our exit polls, too, about what happened across the country, because CBS News talked to voters as they left the polls today, and we telephoned some who voted early to find out what was on their minds as they cast their ballots. And Gail King and Anthony Mason are in Studio 47 tonight to tell us what we've learned.
Well, Nora, picking up on Charlie's point, the voters we talked to today, they are against the economy. Our exit poll shows the economy was the #1 issue for the country. 45% of the voters called it the most important issue. As for the direction of the economy, people very worried about that. The number on your screen, 78% worried, 22%, Anthony, not so much.
The numbers are also discouraging when we ask people about where the country is headed. 65% said it's on the wrong track. And that doesn't bode well in voters' minds for the future. Nearly half, 48%, think life will be worse for the next generation. And this is interesting because that's the highest number we have ever seen in CBS News exit polling. Scott, Nora.
Very important race tonight is the Senate race in Colorado. This is a state that could have gone either way, but it went big for Representative Cory Gardner. He's won the Senate seat there, the Republican. Our Ben Tracy is in Denver at Gardner's headquarters. Ben, they must be feeling pretty good there tonight.
They are. They're still partying here tonight. And as you mentioned, this was a huge pickup for the Republicans here in Colorado tonight. And I just talked to Senator-elect Cory Gardner, and he said that he does not believe this was a vote for the Republicans or against the Democrats. He says it was a warning for people in Washington who don't solve the nation's problems. And he said he really plans to go there into the Senate now and work on some of those problems, and that he's willing to compromise on some things. For the Republicans, though, this is not just about tonight. This is also about 2016. Colorado is a red state that became a blue state, and now I think you'd have to call it very light purple at this point. And the Republicans know that they need this state come 2016 to win the presidency. So a lot of hope in the GOP here in Colorado tonight. But Cory Gardner, the big winner here, and Senator Mark Udall will be coming back to Colorado now that he has been defeated. Scott and Nora.
All right, Ben Tracy, thank you. Want to quickly touch base, too, with Manuel Bojorquez, because he's in Louisiana, where Mary Landrieu has been watching results come in. And as CBS News projects, that race is headed towards a runoff. Manny?
That's right. She's the incumbent, the Democrat here, who addressed supporters as soon as it became clear she was headed for a runoff. She told them this is the race she has been waiting for her entire life, because she wants to prove to Louisiana that her experience has yielded results and that she is not a rubber stamp for President Barack Obama's policies. Her Republican challenger, Bill Cassidy, has tied her at every turn to the president, who is unpopular in this state. Cassidy told his supporters that he will now continue to fight for voters who want to see real change in Washington. And recent polls have shown that in a head-to-head contest, Cassidy has a lead over Landrieu. But of course, outside money will continue to pour into this race. The runoff is on December 6th. Scott and Nora.
Manuel, thanks very much. Another race that going into this evening we thought might go into a runoff was the one in Georgia, but it's not going into a runoff in this Republican wave. The Republican David Perdue has prevailed over Democrat Michelle Nunn, and Arjurika Duncan is in Atlanta at the Nunn headquarters.
Yeah, the signs are down and the crowd is gone at what was the election headquarters of Michelle Nunn. And as you mentioned, this race in particular was suggested by several polls to be a close one, possibly going to a runoff, but that was not the case. At about 11 o'clock Tuesday evening, Michelle Nunn gave her speech conceding and thanked her family. She thanked her supporters, and she even offered her support to her opponent, Republican David Perdue. And David Perdue told us early on, shortly after the polls closed, that he was confident about this race. And at his victory speech, he talked about putting Georgia first and also saying that he wanted to set a new course. Scott and Nora?
African-American turnout in Georgia very high, but not enough to help a Democrat.
All right, Jerika, thank you. And of course, as Bob mentioned, one of the big winners tonight, New Jersey Governor Christie, a potential Republican presidential candidate. He will be our guest on CBS this morning. What can we expect from the Senate with the Republicans in charge? We'll talk to a member of this new majority, Ted Cruz of Texas, and we'll have the latest returns. Back in a moment.